So last session we learned about how do we deal with Angular services in general. Now today we will see how we can communicate and interact with backend services in Angular. So how we can create a presentation and interact with that presentation. So first in our project, we created a server side. This is our project. In our project, we created a server side API, and this server side API, that is REST API, it is having a method called getProducts. This getProducts is going to return products coming from database, that is MongoDB. So this API is ready. Let's start this API. So node REST API.js. So REST API.js. So server started. Let's make a request and test localhost or http://127.0.0.1/8080/getProducts. It is returning the data. Now this is the location from where data is coming. This we have to use in our Angular to present the content. We have to use in Angular to present the content. So how we can handle this? Let's see. So server is running and API is running perfectly. Once the server and API is running, the next step what we have to do is, we need to consume in our Angular application. Let's go to Angular application. Keep this running in the background and let's go to the application. Let's go to the Angular application. This is our Angular application. In the Angular application, in the last session we learned how to create a service. In the services folder, we have a data service. In this data service, so we need to get the data from an API and we need to use the data coming from the API. Get data from the API and use the data from the API. So how do we handle this? How we can handle this? Let me give you detailed option one more time. So how we can manage that? First option is, in order to communicate with server-side APIs, actually whenever you add a service will be like this. To generate the service, we have to use the command. To generate the service, we have to use the command ng generate service and service name. We created a service called data. Okay. Now after creating the service, the next step here we need to understand about how we can consume that service and use the service in our application. So in the service, we need to use a HTTP client. Already I told you, in JavaScript, we use XML HTTP request object. In JavaScript, we use XML HTTP request object. In jQuery, we use AJAX function, or we use getJSON function. In Angular, we use HTTP client. This HTTP client is responsible for connecting and interacting with the data. So it is responsible for connecting and interacting with the data, which is present in the API. So data in the API, it is going to manage the data from the APIs. So we have to use that. Generally, we need to use that. So how the code is written now? For that, what we have to do first is, so we need to import HTTP client into the service. This HTTP client so must able to communicate with the APIs and get the data from the API and use the data coming from API. So what we have to do now is, in the service, we need to just write a HTTP client import to import the HTTP client. In the constructor, we need to create a private object, and the private object called HTTP. It is of type HTTP client. So this is injecting this HTTP client into service. Now this HTTP object will provide all the properties and methods that are used for communicating with the database. It is used for handling communication with the database. So what we need to do now here is, we need to write the logic for connecting and interacting with the database. Now before writing that, one more important point is what kind of data you are going to interact. What kind of data you are going to interact. You have to tell the type of data you are going to interact. So generally, I will give you a simple point here. So let's take a detailed notes for understanding this actually. Yes. Now here, yes, we created REST API. Yeah, started the API. Now here we need to understand few points like HTTP client in Angular. Actually, HTTP client provides a set of properties and methods that are used to communicate with any API. It implicitly uses XML HTTP request object. It implicitly uses XML HTTP request object. It uses that object. So here you have to import HTTP client into your service. How to import HTTP client into the service? How to import and inject into the service? For that, syntactically, you have to write like this. So we have to define import and import HTTP client from Angular common/HTTP. This is the location from where you have to import that HTTP client. HTTP client is imported from this location. It is imported from this location. So we are configuring and importing this. After importing, next step, you have to inject into service. Inject into service. And injecting into service is done into constructor. We have to write a constructor. In the constructor, we have to create a private HTTP object. It is of type HTTP client. So this is how we have to inject into service. Okay, first import, then inject. Now another important is you can use HTTP client object to get post or perform any operation get post or perform any operation. That means you can use like this HTTP. So HTTP, that is the object dot HTTP dot, you have the method like get, and get you can get from API URL. You have to define the API URL. You can get from API URL. But very important is here, one more point is, so when you are accessing any data from URL, from API, you have to specify the type of data returned by URL. You have to specify the type of data returned by URL. That means actually you have to write http.get. You have to tell what type of data it is returning. You have to define that API URL. You have to define what type of data it is returning. That type is very important to tell what type of data it is going to return. This data type. That means, is it product type? Is it employee type? So is it category type? What type of data you are returning? You have to define the type. You need to configure the type. So that is very important. Another option is you need an observable. You need an observable to execute the method asynchronously. Angular uses asynchronous approach. Asynchronous approach means when it is making a request to API, generally the request to API is managed along with other tasks. So it should not block other tasks. That means it should execute asynchronously. So that is done by using observable. Observable is actually provided by a library called RxJS. Reactive extension of JavaScript. RxJS is a library that provides this observable, which is used to execute the method asynchronously. These points are very important to understand in order to consume the service. In order to consume the service in Angular application, you need a HTTP client. You need to import HTTP client, inject that into service, and use the get method to get the data and return the data. But what type of data it is going to return, you have to tell. So much work is there. So what we have to do now is see. First, we have to tell what type of data it should return. Usually, that type is defined in a contract. That means in app folder, we will add a new folder called contracts. Contracts means in object-oriented programming, interfaces are called contracts. we need to create a new interface. Suppose iProduct.ts. It is a TypeScript file. We have to create export interface and interface name iProduct. This interface tells what type of data is coming. Remember, this interface is designed for this data. That means product ID, name, price. That means it has to tell the rules. Rules nothing but product ID must be what type? Number type. Okay, next. Name must be what type? String type. Okay, price must be what type? Number type. So this is the interface that tells what type of data you are going to deal with. It tells the type of data you are going to deal with. Okay. Now, after defining this, go to the data service. In the service, we have to import that interface. Then we have to use import. We have to use import from. We have to import from. So contracts, from contracts. So we have to import iProduct. And the interface is iProduct. iProduct is the interface. We have to import from iProduct. Okay, after importing, now here we have to write the logic. So we need to create a service method that can communicate with that specific URL. So we are going to create here. So a property called products get URL. This products get URL is http://127.0.0.1:8080/get products. This is the products get URL. This is the products get URL. The products get URL. Okay, now that URL is configured here. Now from this URL, we need to get the products and return the products. So in the service, we are creating a method called get products. And here important is this method should execute along with other methods. Then if this method have to execute along with other methods, not blocking the methods, then we have to define the type as observable. We have to define the type as observable. Actually, observable is imported from RxJS. It is imported from RxJS. This observable will allow this function to execute along with other functions. And it should tell what type of data you are going to return. So I am going to return what type of data. We have to tell iProduct type array. That means we are returning iProduct type array because get products is returning an array of all those products. See, this is array. That means it is returning iProduct type array. Okay. Then how to return that? We have to use the return keyword. This.http. Through HTTP get object, you can get the data coming from that particular URL. Products this dot products get URL. And remember the type, what type of data it should return, you have to mention here. That means the type of data coming from this URL is iProduct array type. This is how we have to write. That means now what we are doing is we are writing a service method. You are writing a service method called get products. This service method is using an observable which executes the method without blocking the other methods, and it returns the data iProduct type array. How, from where it will return the data? So by using HTTP object, it will make a get request for this particular URL. It will make a get request for this particular URL. And from there data is coming. It will return the data. What type of data it is returning, it is important to tell. we have to tell what type of data is coming. So data is coming, that is this type. So the service is ready. So the service is ready, and this service is ready to connect with the data, API, get the data and return the data. So service name is data service, and service method name is get products. Get products. So I will copy this now. So what we have to do here is, so here we need to do some extra work now. So the example now, how do we do that? Go to Angular project app folder. Okay, next you have to add a new folder by name. You have to add a new folder by name, contracts. Okay, in contracts, add a new file into contracts by name. You have to add a new file into contracts by name. The file name here is iProduct.ts. In that file, we need to write some logic. So this is to tell what type of data is coming. I have to write this logic. We need to configure that logic here. We need to define the logic here. iProduct.ts. Okay. Next step is now add another folder by name services. In that, open services folder in terminal and run the command. You have to run the command. So ng generate service name data. So now it will generate the data service. That means we have to go to data.service.ts. You have to go to dataservice.ts. There you have to write this code. In dataservice.ts, you have to write this code. This is the code to communicate with the database API and return the data. So this is the code we have to write in that dataservice.ts. Now this we have to consume in our component. So let's go to the components now. Let's go to the components. In the components, we have a products list component. Okay. Go to the products list component. Here we need to consume the data coming from that particular service. First we need to inject that service into our component. So in the constructor we are injecting. So private data, it is coming from data service. We are injecting from the data service. Okay. After injecting the data service, now what we have to do here is, through this we can access the data, because the data service have a method called get products. Through that we can access the data and we can return the data. So what I will do here, I will create a products array. This contains the data coming from the API. So what we do is, we use this dot data, that is service, have get products. Get products is a method which is returning products. And these products, remember, this is an observable. That means observable means it is an asynchronous method. Asynchronous methods are defined as observable. To execute asynchronous methods, we use a method called subscribe. Subscribe is used for executing asynchronous method. Generally, ordinary methods will directly execute, but asynchronous methods are executed by using subscriber. So generally, you know these words when I told you in events concept in JavaScript. Sender and subscriber. Sender sends the message to subscriber. Subscriber notifies the changes. Those words I told you. Here, subscribe is a method which is used to execute asynchronous method. And get products is an asynchronous method we have to execute by using subscribe. This subscribe method will return the data. That means whatever data is coming from this get products, we will store in a product object. Right? We will store in a product object. This is parameter. We are writing a simple lambda. That is the parameter. And what it should return? It should return nothing but this dot products is equal to whatever the product comes. That means what it is doing now. So it is nothing but it is accessing the data and returning it. That means this approach is nothing but that this dot products means that is the array we are having. So that is the array we are having. This array contains the collection of data. That means it's an empty array currently. What we have to do is we have to collect the data. By using get products, we can get the data, we can execute the method, and we can store that into this products array. That means this dot products is an array. And generally it says that it is not assignable. iProduct is not assignable to never type. So why it is saying that it is a never type? So because it is never used actually. Never used means we are not using it. We will use it later, right? So initially the data is coming from the data service. And the data is stored in this particular location. So we are accessing the data and we are storing in this products array. So let me tell you one more time this syntax. What we have to do is on initialization, we need to access the data coming from a service and store in this local location. Actually, it is saying that it is a never type array. Actually, products is an iProduct type array. It is an iProduct type array. What type of array is coming? You have to tell them. So what we have to do, this dot data dot get products will use a subscribe method. So it will use a subscribe method to execute. It will access the product and it will return the product into this dot products. This dot products is equal to whatever the product comes, that will be returned. This is how we need to solve it. That means whatever the product returned, every product it will store inside these products. That means get products is a service method. You can see that service method is getting the data from this URL and it is returning the data. That returned data is collected here. By using subscribe method we will execute and we will store the result in products. Actually it is just a callback function. The callback function, we are just using a simple lambda expression. So this will collect every product, it will collect every product and it will store all the products inside this location. So everything is ready. Now we need to start this products list component and we need to present this data. So to present the data, we will go to this products list HTML and here we will create a heading. And here we will see products list and let's keep that in a container. So we will put class container fluid and here we will keep products list. So we are adding the products list. Okay. and this is coming from display in a tabular form. So class is equal to table and the table hover, and inside this we have a head and th, so tr, okay, and th. Here we are defining product id and the product name and the product price. Now, yeah. Now another important is in the T body, we need to generate a row for every product inside the products collection. Then we have to use a simple ng for let item of collection. Collection is products. And for every item in the products, so we need to generate a cell. In that first cell contains item dot product ID. Second cell contains item dot name, and the third cell contains item dot price. That is how we are presenting the data. Now that is done. We are configuring the data and defining the data. Now we need to execute this. We need to execute this products list. So let's go to the app module. We will go to the app module. In the app module, we will keep that products list. Okay, another important, we have to use the HTTP client module here. We have to import HTTP client module. We have to import HTTP client module because we additionally used that module. Without registering that module, it will not work. So we have to register that HTTP client module so that we can use the HTTP client requests. Okay, it is done. Now in the index page, we will keep the products list in the startup. Okay, products list in the startup. Now let's start this project and see. Open the project location. Shopping is our project. So here ng serve open. Now it should get the data from an API and it should return the data. But one problem will come while presenting the data. Depending on browser, which browser you are using. Browser to browser, some issues will come. So what are the issues? So we will see. Majority issue will be related to CORS. Cross origin sharing. Already we know what is CORS. We discussed about that CORS in various occasions. Because our Node.js is running on separate Node.js API is running on 127.0.0.1 so 8080, and our Angular server is running on 127.0.0.1 4200. That means now across the origin data have to come. Then across the origin, when data is requested, usually it will block that request. But now it is not blocking, it is accessing the data and displaying. So because remember why it is not blocking, because CORS related settings. So we need to configure and install in our browsers, in our server side application. In server side application, if you install the CORS related settings, then automatically it is able to access and present the data. So that generally how to install the CORS and configure the CORS server side, I will tell you. Initially, some browsers may block this. So you have to use CORS so that it is accessible everywhere and executed. So now this is the data coming from MongoDB. And we are presenting client side in Angular. So we saw how to consume the data in jQuery. JavaScript, jQuery, how do we consume the data and use the data? We have seen that. But this is not JavaScript, jQuery. This is Angular. Through Angular, this is how we consume the data. We can create all the interactions for data, inserting, updating, deleting, and all the interactions. But for that, so you need so many other options in Angular to understand and deal with it. As I as we are discussing only the introduction of Angular with API in our full stack. So we will learn only up to this point in Angular. How to use React I will show you now detailedly. That means we will learn React.js, which will allow you to handle the same. So client side. But React requires a separate approach. First, you have to learn how to build a React application, how React application works client side, then how do we consume the data and use the data in React application. We will see that. So initially here what we have done, one more option here we will see. After writing the service, after you write the service, your service is ready. Once the service is ready, next what we have to do, once the service is ready, we need to create a component. That means add a new component. Add a new component. We have to add a new component. Add a new component by name products list. Products list. You need to add a component. You know that ng generate component products list. That is the component. After adding the component, so we have to go to products list dot component dot ts. In that we have to write this logic. In the products list component, we need to write this logic. So what is the logic for the products list component? Let's copy and paste that. This is the products list component ts. I will copy and paste. Here we need to add this logic. This is the logic in the products list component. So yeah. So that is the logic in the products list component. We need to add that here. So this is the logic in the products list component. So we have to inject the service. We need to create an array and we need to get the data and present the data there. We need to configure and present the data there. Okay. Now presenting is done in HTML file, products list dot component dot HTML. In the HTML file, we need to create a table for presenting it. So this is the table designed to present the data. So this is the table for presenting the data. And one more work we have to do. We have to go to app.module.ts. App.module.ts. In that app module, so we need to import the HTTP client module. In the imports, you have to import the HTTP client module. In the imports, you have to import the module. I will give entire file here just for your reference sake. So we have to import everything. This is the HTTP client module you have to import. So this is a simple example of how we can handle communication with the backend API. That means currently you are looking at a mean stack example. That means our database is coming from MongoDB and we are using a middleware called Express, and client side we are using Angular and server side we are using Node.js. This is an example of mean stack. Now we will see how this works by using MERN stack. MERN stack means you have to learn. So MongoDB already you know, Express you know, instead of Angular, now we will use React.js. We will use React.js for consuming and configuring and handling the service. That means now we need to understand what is React.js and how React.js is used in full stack development front end. We will learn all the points about React.js. Angular I given you introduction and how do we consume, but React we will detailedly discuss how React works, what is React, and how the consume of data, everything will happen, right? That we will see in our next session, right? Tomorrow we will start working with React. How do we deal with the React, right? Just for 1-2 days, our session will start at 9:30. Just 1-2 days. Some other batches are having a problem in the timing. That is the reason we need to go little bit long run. So 9:30 we will start the session from tomorrow onwards, and just 1-2 days after that time will be allocated, and again we will have the normal time. Okay, so tomorrow onwards we will start working with React. What is React? We will see how do we work with that, right? This entire document I will upload. Once go through it. If you find any problem in handling this, I will explain one more time, right? You try this. If you face any problem, I will explain one more time how to create this end-to-end application. Okay, tomorrow we'll discuss about it.